Stranded poolside with the billionaire's son. A clean beach billionaire romance. By Susanne Ash. Chapter 1. Pulling into the drive of the Sutton beach house, Caroline was pleasantly surprised. As personal assistant to billionaire widow Evelyn Sutton, she'd been in her fair share of high-end mansions, but this place had a certain southern charm with wide brick steps leading up to the entrance. Two white columns holding up a tall porch cover flanked the large solid oak door. Wooden rockers and large hanging ferns completed the picture-perfect modern take on an old plantation house. Parking her silver Nissan rental next to the four-car garage, she grabbed her bags and made her way up to the house. She was halfway up the stairs when she heard a familiar beep. Caroline didn't need to pull out her phone to know it was her boss and the owner of this beautiful place. Sighing, she ignored the text message for now and unlocked the front door. She walked around the open concept living area. The place was bright and cheery. The kitchen was light and spacious. Large windows, high-end stainless steel appliances and marble countertops made up the gourmet kitchen that would rarely be used. Shaking her head at the excesses of her billionaire employer and her family, she put her purse on the table and dropped her bags on the floor next to it. It was a nice table with a beautifully marbled top and 8 chairs lined up around it. In a normal house, this would be the dining area, but here, she was sure she would find a formal dining room with plenty of space to entertain. It wouldn't take much to get this place set up for the annual family gathering. A series of beeps from her phone reminded her it was time to get back to her boss. Mrs. Sutton wasn't the most patient person. While busy scrolling through 15 new messages she'd received since leaving the Myrtle Beach airport, a noise made her glance up from the screen. The door to the back porch opened and a man with toned arms and a washboard stomach wearing nothing but swim shorts walked in. A towel covered his head and face and he was leaving a trail of wet footprints on the hardwood floor as he walked towards her. "Hey gorgeous. I'm glad you finally made it down here." Pete Sutton, her boss's youngest son, looked at her from under the towel, a big grin on his face. His hazel eyes twinkled with mirth while he finished drying his dark brown hair. She'd had a crush on Pete since the 4th of July company barbecue in Phoenix last summer. Heat rose in her cheeks when she thought about how foolish she'd been. What are you doing here? I thought the house was empty." Her hands were shaking and she dropped her phone. Why was Pete still affecting her this way? He had showered her with attention that day. He'd been friendly and chatty, seeking her out throughout the day. They'd eaten their hamburgers together in the shade of a large boulder, a little apart from the rest of the crowd. She'd enjoyed his tales of travel and adventure. When the band started playing, he dragged her to her feet, and they danced for a while before she started to notice the looks from the people around them. Caroline shook her head to clear the memory of that day. "I didn't think the family was supposed to get here until right before Easter," she said, doing her best to compose herself. Pete laughed. "Relax, it's just me. I'm pretty sure my mother isn't coming until a week from Thursday, is she? What are you doing down here so early?" "I'm here to open the house and get it ready for you guys." She bent down to pick up her phone. Pete's presence had caught her by surprise, but she could handle herself around him, thanks to Miss Penny. The gray-haired and competent executive assistant had pulled her aside at the picnic and explained that Mrs. Sutton did not approve of any relationship between her sons and her employees. One look toward her boss had told her that Miss Penny was telling the truth. The question was, how could she extricate herself from the situation without a scene? He had seemed more than a little interested. Pete pulled her back out of her thoughts. "I usually try to come down a little early. I love it down here. Nice to have some company this year. Usually, it's just me." He grinned and wrapped the towel around his waist. Caroline looked at the puddle on the floor. She'd have to get that mopped up before it ruined the hardwood floors. She would also have to fall back on Miss Penny's advice to make it through the coming days. Flirt back and ask him about spending more time together. That will make him take off quicker than anything else, Miss Penny had suggested back then. The older woman had been with the company and the family since the early days when Brad Sutton, Sr. had built the Sutton & Sutton real estate company from nothing. the boy won't let anyone close. Hasn't been in a relationship since that poor girl in high school. If you want him to back off, pretend you're interested. He won't bother you again. And that's exactly what Caroline had done. The flirting had stopped immediately, and up until today she'd done her best to spend as little time as possible around her boss's youngest son. The fact that she still had a crush on him had nothing to do with it. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. I'll get out of your way and get settled in. Caroline grabbed her bags and then stopped. Where would you like me to stay? She asked. How about my room? He suggested with a wink and another one of those grins that made her stomach flutter. She'd have to keep her distance now that they were stuck in the same house for a few weeks. This was so not turning out to be what she expected. Oh well, if there was anything Caroline Davis was good at, it was rolling with the punches. She'd had plenty of experience in that department over the past few years. I think I'll pass on that, for now, she grinned back at him. Since working for Evelyn Sutton, matriarch of the influential and filthy rich Sutton family, she'd had her share of brief run-ins with Pete. Miss Penny's advice had served her well. To this day, the best way to deal with his harmless flirtations was to go along with it. He laughed and grabbed her bags, motioning her to follow him down the narrow hallway toward the back of the house. Sorry about the room. He dropped her bags on the bed. She looked around. It was a bright bedroom with a queen-sized poster bed, a small sitting area, a desk, and ensuite bathroom. While it wasn't the nicest bedroom she'd stayed in, it was much bigger and prettier than the little apartment she'd given up when she took this job and moved to the Sutton mansion in Arizona. Want a quick tour of the rest of the house before you unpack? He asked. The house was even larger and more impressive than it had seemed at first glance. After seeing the remaining bedrooms with their sweeping views of the ocean on one side and the waterway on the other, Pete's earlier comment started to make sense. Not that she minded staying in the smallest of the guest rooms with the least attractive view, much. Caroline's phone rang. Mrs. Sutton's patience with her personal assistant had apparently run out. I better take this, she mumbled as she walked back to her room. An hour later, she was staring at 4 pages of notes from the call with her boss. Who decided to do complete room makeovers less than 2 weeks before expecting a house full of guests? Evelyn Sutton, apparently. And Caroline had been tasked with ensuring it would all get done in time. As usual, money wasn't an issue. Mrs. Sutton had gone so far as to suggest a little bribe here and there wouldn't hurt. Caroline shook her head. The budget for this little freshening up of 3 of the bedrooms was twice the amount she owed the hospital for her mother's treatments. But that was neither here nor there. It did, however, remind her she had yet to check in with her baby sister. She grabbed her phone and started dialing. How's school? She asked before stretching out on the bed. Going well, her sister chimed, though organic chemistry is killing me. I might need a tutor. Caroline wasn't sure how she'd come up with the money for a decent tutor. They weren't cheap. Nothing ever was. Don't worry about paying for it. I applied for a job at the deli, Katie continued. It'll only be twice a week for a couple of hours. But, before she could get a word in edgewise, her little sister continued without bothering to take a breath. I know, you're going to tell me I need to focus on my studies and keep my grades up. I get it. I know you worry, but I've got this, sis. It'll be fun, and I promise it won't cut into my classes or study time. Caroline sighed. The cold, hard truth was that she didn't have the extra money right now to pay for a tutor. She didn't have a choice but to let it go for the time being. We'll talk about it when I come see you in Charleston, she told her sister. Even with her rapidly growing to-do list, she hoped to sneak off for a few hours to see her sister one day this week. For that to happen, she needed to get back to work. Caroline walked into the kitchen and started a big pot of coffee. She would need the extra caffeine to make serious progress on everything Mrs. Sutton wanted taken care of before the rest of the family arrived. It didn't take long for the easy trip to open the Sutton Beach house to turn into a major project that would take every bit of her organizational and time management talents. She needed to get in touch with the interior designer to discuss the bedroom makeovers. Half an hour later, Caroline was feeling desperate. "Are you sure you can't take on a project this week? I'd be happy to pay extra for a rush job." This was the third painting company she'd called. Shelby Blake, the designer, had made it clear that the only way she could finish the rooms in time was if the painting happened this week. The problem was that Caroline couldn't find anyone able to do it on such a short time frame. "Thanks for your time." She finished her phone call and shoved her phone away in frustration. "This is ridiculous," she mumbled under her breath. "What is?" She almost jumped out of her chair. Pete walked over to the coffee maker and poured himself a cup. "Nothing." She wasn't about to let her boss's son know that she was having trouble doing her job. "Spit it out." "Maybe I can help." He sat down across from her, looking like he actually meant it. She doubted there was much he could do. While he held a title in the company, he'd never done a hard day's work in his life. Unlike his older brother Brad, who worked 80 hours a week at the office of Sutton and Sutton Corporation, Pete was off jetting around the world to catch the biggest waves and ski the steepest slopes. Or hanging out on the beach here in South Carolina. What could he possibly do to help? Pete looked at her over his coffee mug with raised eyebrows, waiting for a reply. She shrugged and did her best to keep the frustration out of her voice. "I doubt it, unless you're handy with a paintbrush and a roller. I need to have 3 of the bedrooms painted this week so the interior designer can get started on Monday. So far, I haven't been able to find anyone willing to take the job." At this rate, Caroline would spend the next few days doing the painting herself. Not that she had any experience, but what else could she do? "Let me make a couple of calls." Pete walked into the office next to the kitchen, coffee in hand. He returned a few minutes later. "I called a friend of mine from town. He can have a paint crew out here first thing in the morning." He handed her a piece of paper with a quote for the work. It was surprisingly reasonable, especially for a rush job. "That's an amazing deal. Please tell your friend he has the job. Don't sound so impressed. All I did was make a phone call." He pulled his phone out and sent a quick text. "Thank you. That's a huge lift of my shoulder, and I appreciate it. More than you know." Few people in her life went out of their way to give her a helping hand. 9 times out of 10 the buck stopped with her. It was nice to be on the receiving end of kindness for a change. "No problem," he shrugged. "Let me know if there's anything else I can do. I spend a lot of time down here and know a bunch of people in town." He walked off with his coffee. She watched him leave and found herself humming Sweet Caroline, the song they danced to at the company picnic last summer. He'd twirled her around and pulled her close. Caroline shook her head to clear it. She would have to be careful around him. He was a charming guy, and she'd fallen hard for him last July. The last thing she needed was to revive her crush on Pete. After all, he was the son of her boss, and if she had to guess, a billionaire in his own right. Not when she needed the generous salary Mrs. Sutton was paying her. She had bills to pay. She was doing everything she could to keep her sister in school and the bill collectors at bay. "What's up?" She heard Pete answer his phone from the living room. A peek toward the large sectional told her he was Skyping with someone. She walked back toward the kitchen table, doing her best to ignore the conversation in the background. "You've got to come down here. Baja is amazing right now. You should see the waves, dude. And the babes. Hot bods in tiny bikinis. You'll love it, man." It sounded like the kind of trip Pete took regularly. She expected him to take off right away, leaving her to deal with the fallout when he wouldn't attend his mother's Easter party. It was the reminder she needed to cool down her crush on the youngest Sutton son. The last thing she needed in her life was a fling with a pretty playboy. There was nothing but hurt and heartache in it for her. Time to get back to work. Grabbing her phone and organizer, she made calls to a cleaning crew, requesting quotes from local caterers, and to arrange for someone to clean the pools this week. When Pete walked back into the kitchen around lunchtime, she'd made a lot of progress. Heading out to Baja, she asked, looking up from her organizer. "You overhead that?" he asked with raised eyebrows. She refused to feel bad about the intrusion of his privacy. It wasn't her fault he video chatted with his friends within earshot of her. What was she supposed to do? Leave the house? Not likely. Could really help it. She shrugged. "No, I'm staying here," he continued. "I'm enjoying the company." He winked before adding. "Plus my mother would kill me if I missed out on the family shindig." She nodded and looked back down at her notes. It surprised her that he had declined the invitation. After all, the shindig didn't start for another 2 weeks. He had time to go and come back. She wasn't sure what to make of this latest development. Pete stuck around, taking a seat at the table across from her. She did her best to ignore him. "I'm heading into town to grab lunch at a local place that also caters," he said a few moments later. "Why don't you join me?" "I hate eating alone, and it would give you a chance to talk to the owner." Smooth. How was she going to get herself out of this? Going out to lunch with Pete was the last thing she needed, and if she was honest with herself, exactly what she wanted. She'd love to get to know him better and find out who the person behind the trust fund slacker image was. Except she couldn't get involved with her boss's son and keep her job. She'd just treat this like a business lunch. She went out to eat with Mrs. Sutton all the time. This was no different. Right? Chapter 2. Pete liked his mother's personal assistant with the pretty blue eyes. He hadn't seen her around much since last summer, but there was something about her. Caroline was much nicer than the last person who'd been at his mother's beck and call, or the one before that. Evelyn Sutton went through PAs as quickly his friend Randy went through cars. Rarely did one last more than a year. He hoped Caroline would stick around for a while. He liked her attitude, and her looks didn't hurt either. He wouldn't mind running his fingers through that gorgeous thick hair of hers. He glanced over at her and watched her pull those dark mahogany tresses out of the low bun she wore when she worked. "What can I get you guys to drink?" The waitress saved him from making a fool of himself. What was going on? He was acting like a lovesick teenager. He usually had more game than this. "Iced tea for me, please," she requested. "Make that too," he told the waitress before lowering his head to look through the menu to keep from staring at her. As much as he enjoyed flirting with a pretty girl, alarm bells kept going off in his head when it came to Caroline. If he wasn't careful, he would start to care for the girl, and that was a bad idea. The last time he'd fallen for a girl, things didn't end well. It had taken him years to get over Chris. Suddenly, he regretted inviting her along. He'd have lunch, take her home, and then take off for his brother's house for a few days. That would take his mind off Caroline in no time. "You." Caroline swallowed and pushed the glass away in obvious disgust. Pete tried hard not to laugh. "I take it you forgot you're in the South." Even with a scrunched up, sour expression, she was adorable. "Tea down here is sweet tea." "That's disgusting." "There's enough sugar in that glass to keep every dentist in town in business." "I need some water or something. Maybe a shot of insulin." He laughed before waving the waitress down to order her an unsweetened tea. A hand clasped his shoulder mid-bite. Pete glanced up to see his friend Randy. "I was wondering when you would make it down here," Randy said, before taking a seat next to Caroline in their booth. Pete shot his friend a warning glare. "Caroline, this is Randolph Bretford. We went to college together." "Randy, this is my friend Caroline. It's her first trip down here." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Caroline," he said. "Palmar Island is beautiful. I'd be happy to show you around." He gave her a warm smile, and held her hand just a little too long for a polite handshake. Pete clenched his teeth as he watched his best friend lean back in his seat, his eyes never leaving Caroline. No way would he let Randy show her around the island. Just because he decided to keep his distance, didn't mean he was ready for his friend to hit on her. Randy had a bit of a reputation as a womanizer, and it was well deserved. Everything all set for the race this weekend, he asked before Randy could commandeer the conversation. Everything is right on track. Donations are coming in strong. Are you sure you want to? Yep, Pete cut in. I'm running the 10K for charity, as usual. He hoped the look he shot his friend would make him drop the topic. He didn't want his secret getting out. Thankfully, Randy got the hint. Rising from his seat, he excused the disruption of their meal and was on his way out the door. Pete let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. That had been close. Randy was waiting for him at the bar when he walked in. You usually look more excited when I ask you to write me a 7-figure check, his friend commented while pushing an ice-cold beer his way. He took a big swig, doing his best to wash down the frustration. Getting away from Caroline was no longer an option. His plans of staying at Brad's house had fallen through, and he hated staying at hotels. Just his rotten luck that his brother was in no mood for house guests when he needed a place to crash. Tell me more about Caroline. Where did you meet that pretty lady? She's off limits. Randy put his hands up in surrender. Okay. Sorry. Pete didn't intend to come off so strong, and he forced himself into calmness. She's my mother's personal assistant, he said, then shrugged for effect. Interesting. Randy took a sip of his own beer. Is this about pissing off your mother, or do you actually like the girl? I'm guessing you like her. I haven't seen you this rattled in. There's nothing going on between Caroline and me. I brought her to Mary's so she could talk to her about catering my mother's Easter thing. Even better. Randy rubbed his hands together. You won't mind then if I ask her out? I need a hot date for the race this weekend. Unlike you, I'm not going to be sweaty and exhausted. Not going to happen. I told you she's off limits. End of discussion. Let's go over the race details so I can get out of here. They spent the next hour going over donations, registrations, and a million other details that would ensure Saturday's charity race would go off without a hitch. He hated to admit it, but Randy was good at this. He'd relied on his friend to organize the event for the past 8 years. During that time, it had grown from a little local fun race to a full-day event that drew the attention of elite runners and high-dollar sponsors. This year, the donations were at a record high. The numbers looked impressive even before he wrote his check. Are you sure you want to continue matching? Randy asked. That's a big chunk of change, even for a trust fund baby like yourself. Pete didn't hesitate. He wrote a high 7-figure check, signed it, and handed it to Randy. Don't lose that, he teased. About Caroline, Randy was leaning back in his seat, a smug smile on his face. He should have known that the guy wasn't going to drop the subject, especially now that he had the check in his hand. The only way to keep Randy from hitting on her was to claim Caroline for himself. Worse, he had to date her for real. His friend knew him too well to get away with faking it. That was okay. They'd go on a few dates over the coming 2 weeks and cool it off when they got back to Phoenix. Or he could fly out to one of the other family properties. Northern California was nice this time of year. Tahiti was even better and further away. Nothing sounded as exciting as it had a few years ago, but he was sure he could come up with a destination to take his mind off things. It had worked well for the past decade. He'd traveled the globe, jumping from one adventure to the next, never stopping long enough to get attached. The problem was that his nomad lifestyle was starting to leave him feeling empty. He took another big swig of his beer. Pete felt better now that he had a plan. And the best part was that it didn't include getting his heart involved. Because he knew from personal experience that that was a bad idea. That's how you got hurt, which wasn't something he was willing to risk again. He just had to sound convincing enough for Randy to back off. Don't even think about it, bro. He kept his gaze fixed on his friend to make sure he got the message loud and clear. She's mine. Where had that come from? He sounded possessive, and the thought of Randy hitting on her made him see red. Maybe he needed to work on a bit of distance between himself and Caroline sooner than expected. After he was positive Randy would butt out. About time, man. Randy smiled and finished his beer. I was starting to worry about you. About time for what? Pete had no idea what the guy was talking about. He hadn't been living like a monk. Far from it. If he was honest with himself, he built quite a reputation of being a player himself. About time someone got under your skin. Plus, you've got to admit, you're going to enjoy your mother's reaction when she finds out you're dating the help. He couldn't deny the truth in that. If he was honest with himself, it was a compelling reason to stick around and have some fun with Caroline. Nothing serious, just a little fun before he took off on his next adventure. Pushing his mother's buttons by showing up with Caroline at the family gathering would keep him from being bored to death at the event. Of course, he'd make sure his mother didn't do anything stupid like firing the best PA she'd had in years. Chapter 3. Caroline woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and something sweet. She pulled back the covers and climbed out of bed. She showed and dressed before heading out to the kitchen. The smell came from a bag of croissants. A note was propped up against the bag. Enjoy breakfast, back after lunch, she read in Pete's handwriting. The kind gesture made her smile. Caroline grabbed a large mug and a plate and poured herself a cup of coffee. It was strong, just the way she liked it. She carried her cup and plate outside for a quiet breakfast on the porch. The croissants were still warm and melted in her mouth. The rich buttery taste provided the perfect balance to the slight bitterness of the coffee. Pete kept surprising her with his kindness and thoughtfulness. It also made her a little uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable enough to pass on fresh pastry, but enough to cause a nagging feeling in the back of her head. The doorbell rang. Caroline put her dishes in the large farmhouse sink on her way to answer the door. The painters arrived, and throughout the morning she could hear them moving furniture and prepping the rooms to paint. It was a distraction, but she didn't mind because it meant one big task on her never-ending to-do list was being taken care of. Her phone beeped. Got the job, her sister's text read. Congrats, she replied. She wanted to say more, but this was Katie's decision. At least the tutor would be paid for. That was a relief. Hoping to come down for a visit this week. Caroline was making good progress with the prepping and planning. Taking an afternoon to go visit Katie in Charleston shouldn't be a problem. When? Can't wait to see you. Neither could Caroline. It would be good to see her little sister, and it would help get her mind off Pete. She mapped the route on her phone. Less than 2 hours to get from Palmar Island to Charleston. Tomorrow? Tomorrow is great. No afternoon classes. Perfect. I'll text you when I leave around lunchtime tomorrow. Caroline opened her organizer and got to work. She was taking a quick break for lunch when her phone rang. Ms. Davis? This is she. This is Rose from Island Wines. You called about several cases of Groth Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon? I did. Is it ready for pickup? Unfortunately, there was a misunderstanding with our distributor. I won't get the shipment until April 24th. Mrs. Sutton's wanted the wine for a party on Saturday the 20th. Caroline canceled the order. She'd have to call around and see if any other store had it in stock. She made a note in her organizer and scanned the rest of her to-do list. She still needed to talk to the property manager to confirm the venue for the party Mrs. Sutton was hosting a week from Saturday and hopefully get a quick look at the space. She needed to get a handle on what she would need to rent furniture-wise and how much waitstaff to hire for the event. Pete walked in the kitchen the moment she'd slammed the fridge door in frustration. His eyebrows shot up. Sorry, she said before stomping back to the kitchen table and plopping down in her chair. Pete grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and leaned against the counter. Let it out, he prompted her. What has my mother done now? It's not your mother's fault, at least not directly, she sighed. She wants to host a party at the clubhouse by the beach next Saturday, and the property manager just told me it's booked for the entire weekend. Evelyn is not going to be happy, and I can't afford to. She stopped herself before admitting that she couldn't, under any circumstances, lose this job. Her sister depended on her. Pete pulled out his phone. Hey James, Pete Sutton here. Can you confirm that the beach clubhouse is available for my mother's party on Saturday? She heard him say as he walked out on the deck. She wasn't sure how he expected to fix this with the place already rented out, but it was nice of him to try. She made a mental note to return the favor by cooking him dinner tonight. Pete sauntered back in with a big smile on his face. He spun the phone in his hand before shoving it in his front pocket. It was all a big misunderstanding. My mother hosts this party every year and there's a standing reservation on it for my family Easter weekend. The new assistant property manager wasn't aware. It's not going to happen again. I told James you'd be stopping by sometime this week to check the place out and to let his staff know what you need to get it ready for the party. Caroline could have kissed him. She was so relieved. Oh my gosh. Thank you. She started to babble on and then stopped herself. You probably just saved my job. She got back to work and tried not to think about how he'd resolved her problems twice now. If she couldn't do it on her own, she'd eventually be fired. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. She worked fast and furious, trying hard to get far enough ahead to justify taking tomorrow afternoon off for a quick visit to see her sister. Pete was gone for most of the day, and she couldn't blame him. The painters walked back and forth through the house and made plenty of noise while preparing the bedrooms to paint. Thankfully, they finished their work around 4 p.m. and the crew chief assured her they'd paint the walls first thing in the morning. She spent the next hour calling a temp agency to provide waitstaff for the upcoming party and ordering quite a few spring-themed flower arrangements to brighten up the space. Happy with her progress, she called it a day and decided to go for a quick swim in the pool while she had the place to herself. She was getting out of the pool and wrapping herself in a towel large and fluffy enough it could double as a cozy throw when Pete returned, a large paper bag in hand. It smelled spicy and her stomach grumbled. Hungry? I picked up Thai food. I'm starving and Thai is my favorite. Give me a minute to change into something dry. Take your time. I'll open a bottle of wine and get a fire going. Do you mind if we eat out here? That sounds lovely. I'll be right back. She rushed off to her bedroom, quickly drying her hair with the large towel. Her racing heart must simply be a result of the laps she'd swam and rushing through the house. She almost convinced herself, ignoring the butterflies in her stomach. Caroline quickly dressed in a comfortable pair of yoga pants and her favorite burgundy-colored tunic. Blow-drying her hair would take too long. She brushed it and pulled it into a messy bun before grabbing a cardigan and heading back to the patio. That was quick. Pete sounded impressed. Caroline guessed most of the high-maintenance girls she'd seen him with would have taken more time with their appearance. She couldn't help but wonder what he thought of her casual, no-makeup look. I will rush for food. Pete's eyes lit up and he laughed. A fire burned in the pit as he set out the containers on a low table between two of the steamer deck lounge chairs. Wine? He asked, holding out a glass for her. She took it and waited for him to pour his own before taking a sip. The Riesling was crisp and tart with just enough sweetness to create the perfect balance to the spicy food. She nursed her wine and curled up on the chair closest to the fireplace. The chicken and shrimp pad thai he'd ordered was delicious. For a few minutes, they simply ate in comfortable silence. Your sister is in school in Charleston, right? He asked, refilling her wine. You mentioned it in July at the barbecue. It surprised her. That was 9 months ago. It was such a random little thing to remember. Not that it was a secret, but didn't expect him to pay attention to the college his mother's PA sister attended. She does. She's in pre-med down there. I was hoping to drive down and see her tomorrow. Heat rosette her cheeks at the admission. She shouldn't feel guilty about taking a little time off as long as her work didn't suffer, but that was easier said than done. Pete nodded and took another sip of wine. To keep the conversation going and cover up her embarrassment, she told him how well Katie was doing. In a few years, she'll be a doctor. Caroline couldn't suppress the pride in her voice. That kid has a big dream, and she's going after it. Katie would do amazing things and make an important difference in the lives of her future patients. Sounds like a go-getter. What made her choose medicine? Pete asked. That's not an easy field to get into. Caroline paused, unsure of how much she should share about her family's past and the reason Katie had chosen this path. But she saw nothing but kindness and simple curiosity in his eyes, and she wanted to tell him. Need to really. Our mom died from breast cancer 2 years ago. She fought it as hard as she could and went through round after round of chemo and radiation. We watched her get weaker and weaker. Eventually, the cancer got the better of her. Caroline found she couldn't meet his eyes, so she stared into the fire to avoid any possible pity. Katie was the one who went with her to all the doctor's appointments. She read everything she could and dug through all the research. She talked to the doctors about treatment options, trials, and alternative therapies to support Mom's immune system. Caroline took a sip of wine. It wasn't easy to talk about the darkest 9 months of their lives. When Mom couldn't be saved, she decided to go into oncology to help give others the best shot possible at going into remission. She looked up when she felt his hand on hers. He gave her a sad smile. I'm sorry. There was no pity in his voice or his eyes. You must both miss her a lot. He took back his hand and picked up his glass of wine. She wiped a tear from her cheek, hoping he hadn't noticed it in the dark. For the next little while they sat there, enjoying the wine, the dancing flames in the fireplace, and the comfort of each other's company. She looked over at Pete, the warm light from the fire playing around his dark hair. She couldn't keep the smile from playing around her lips when she thought of how much he'd helped her this week. Or how kind and generous he'd been with the waitress at the restaurant. Her mother had always said that you could tell a lot about a guy based on how he treated waitresses. He may have grown up rich and privileged, but from what she'd seen this week, he didn't act like a spoiled brat. He acted like the kind of guy she'd like to spend more time with. But a fling with her boss's son was a bad enough idea. Getting her heart involved was even worse. Chapter 4. Pete yawned and couldn't bring himself to get out of bed. It had taken him forever to fall asleep the night before, and now he was feeling it. Having dinner with her on the back deck of his family's beach house had been quite the experience. He started to feel something for the beautiful Caroline, and that wasn't a good idea. So far, he'd always been good at avoiding close relationships. He wasn't a monk, but he was good at not getting his heart involved. He was tempted to take off. To get on his jet and fly off on another adventure. There was a reason he didn't own a place of his own, here or in Phoenix. He enjoyed living free and without attachments. If you didn't stick around long enough, there was less of a chance of people hurting you. He threw back the covers and rubbed his face. He needed to clear his head and figure out if he wanted to stick around between now and Easter. He'd turned down the trip to Baja, but if he skipped the race, there was just enough time for a quick trip to the Bahamas. His buddy Craig had been begging him to go diving there for months. But she'd opened up about her sister and her mom. He was pretty sure that wasn't something she did often. He'd noticed her silent tears, and it had taken every ounce of self-control he possessed not to lean over, cradle her beautiful face in his hands and wipe them away. She'd gone through a lot and was working hard to give her sister the future they both deserved. And she did it working for his mother of all people. It said a lot about the work ethic she had. Few assistants lasted as long as she had. She deserved better than that. More than anything, she deserved happiness and joy in her life. He would do what he could to make that happen. With that in mind, he hopped in the shower and was back from the small artisan bakery in town before Caroline woke. It was too chilly to enjoy breakfast outside. Instead, he set out the pastries and coffee in the little breakfast nook with a bay window that overlooked the intercoastal waterway. It was a beautiful spot, and the sun streaming in the large windows made it bright and inviting. His girl deserved to be spoiled a bit. He should have picked up some flowers while he was out. His girl, he wasn't sure where the thought had come from, but it felt right. He heard Caroline moving around and decided to shove the confusing feelings in his chest aside to deal with later. The painting crew arrived while they were finishing breakfast and proceeded to march through the living room and kitchen on a regular basis. There was only so much of that he could take, and from the look of it, Caroline wasn't getting much work done with all these interruptions. "Why don't we head down to Charleston for the day and let these guys work?" he suggested. "You can work from one of the cafes downtown and visit with your sister." "Actually, that's not a bad idea. I won't get much done if I stay around here." He watched her shove her phone and organizer into her purse. "Your car or mine?" was all she asked. That had been easy. There was no way he was riding in that little rental of hers. That thing barely qualified as a car. "I'll drive." He walked out to the garage. "A Tesla, huh?" She didn't sound terribly impressed. "It's the new P100D, got it delivered down here just a few weeks ago." Judging from the blank look on her face, that didn't mean anything to her. "It's fun to drive, good for the environment, and it won't stand out like a sore thumb parked on the street in Charleston," he said with a shrug. Was her only reply as she climbed into the car. "Do you mind if we stop at the Charleston wine shop? It's on the way, and they have the 2015 Chateau Giscors your mom wants for the party in stock." "No problem," he replied. "What's the address?" An hour and a half later, they pulled into the parking lot of the high-end wine merchant. Within a few minutes, Caroline returned with 2 cases of the rare wine that they stored safely in the trunk. "I just spent $2,000 on wine," she giggled as they got back into the car. It was adorable. He'd had bar tabs far larger than that, but he kept that to himself. He enjoyed showing her the sights in Charleston. They visited St. Michael's Church, walked through the historic market, and took a walk along the Battery and down to White Point Garden. "It's beautiful. This place has so much history and charm." He loved her enthusiasm and started to look at the historic homes, the old oaks covered in Spanish moss and the waves crashing on the Battery walls with fresh eyes. It was a beautiful place. Almost as beautiful as her. Without a conscious thought, he took her hand and suggested they continue their walk along the point. They sat down in one of the swings at Waterfront Park, taking a break from all the walking they'd done. People watching with Caroline was an interesting experience. "See the couple over there?" She pointed at a middle-aged pair walking side by side along the pier. "They just had a big argument about her shopping habits and the fact that she keeps running up a huge credit card bill on things they don't need. He's in advertising and worried about being replaced by someone younger and less expensive. He doesn't want to tell her yet." Sure enough, the guy didn't look happy, and the wife was carrying a large shopping bag. Who knew sitting around and making up stories about the people around them could be so entertaining? Her phone beeped. Looking up at him, she said, "It's my sister. She's done with classes for the day." It surprised him that the thought of sharing his time with her and her sister bothered him. He didn't want what they'd experienced to end so quickly. He also wasn't a jerk, and he knew she'd been looking forward to seeing Katie. "Why don't I drop you off at the college, go charge the car, and run some errands? The 2 of you can meet me at Old Henry's for a late lunch." "My treat." By the look in her eyes and the grateful smile she sent his way, he'd come up with the right plan. He enjoyed seeing her happy and looked forward to meeting her sister. Charging the car took less than 20 minutes, and he found himself with a good hour and a half before meeting the girls at the restaurant. That gave him just enough time to check in with Dr. Morganton, head of cancer research at the College of Charleston. He'd stop by and see what progress they were making. He hoped the donations he'd been able to make over the past few years were making a difference. He would continue to do everything he could to give people like Chris and Caroline's mom a better chance of survival. Caroline and a young woman were sitting at the bar when he arrived at the restaurant. "This place is supposed to be amazing," he heard the young woman exclaim. "I've been dying to go, but I wasn't going to spend that kind of money on food. I can buy a month's worth of ramen for what I'd spend on lunch here. Was money really that tight for them? He assumed that Caroline's salary was quite generous. He'd have to look into that. For now, he would treat the girls to lunch. Sorry, I'm late. He stepped up the bar. Caroline's smile made his heart skip a beat. We just got here ourselves, Caroline said. Oh, good. He'd lost track of time during his meeting with Dr. Morganton and then struggled to find a parking spot. This is my sister. Katie, this is Pete Sutton. She put her hand on her sister's arm and squeezed. Nice to meet you, Katie. He shook her hand. I don't know about you lovely ladies, but I'm starving. Let me check on the table. Katie laughed, making Caroline smile, one of her dazzling smiles. I think the starving is mutual all the way around. So Miss Davis, any fun plans for the summer? They'd placed their lunch orders and were busy smearing honey butter on the fresh biscuits their waiter had brought out. He watched Caroline self-consciously wipe a few crumbs from her lips with her napkin. Actually, it isn't Davis. Mom and I changed our last name to her maiden name a few years ago. Just call me Katie. He raised an eyebrow and looked at Caroline. I was enrolled in college. It was too much hassle to change it. I don't love having my dad's name, but it hasn't bothered me enough to change it, she shrugged. To answer your question, I'm taking a couple of online classes and working as a counselor at the summer camp the university is running, Katie said. That doesn't sound like a lot of fun. His own summer breaks had been very different. Flashes of memories danced through his head. Most of them involved beaches, surfing, bars, and pretty girls in bikinis. He'd worked hard while he was at Stanford and graduated with honors, much to his father's surprise. He'd partied just as hard and had spent his summers looking for the perfect beach and the perfect wave when he wasn't volunteering his time with Chris. The camp is amazing. Katie's face lit up as she explained how the university put on an immersive STEM-based camp for underprivileged kids in the state. Many of them came from schools without the budget for physics labs, high-powered microscopes, or even a working chemistry lab. It gave kids a chance to spend their summer exploring science in a fun and interactive way. He made a mental note to look into the need for funding of the camp. He liked Katie. She was just as driven as her older sister, and he had no doubt she would make an excellent doctor. Did you go to school down here as well? He turned to Caroline in time to see her blush and lower her eyes. No, she hesitated before continuing. I went to a community college for 2 years and then got my BA at an online school. While working 2 jobs and taking care of Mom and me, Katie injected. I have no idea how she did it. I don't think she slept for 2 years. He nodded. Caroline didn't get the chance to go to a good school and focus on her studies. She played the hand she'd been dealt and made the most of it. There was nothing to be ashamed of in that, yet he could tell it was an uncomfortable subject for her. Any thoughts on where you will do your residency? He asked Katie to change the subject. The girl had a solid plan to become an oncologist in record time. She would make a great doctor and would love to do something to help her make that happen. He could easily pay for her education, but wasn't sure how the sisters would react to an offer like that. Thank you for lunch. And thank you for sending all those leftovers home with my sister, Caroline said after they'd settled in for the drive back. I know you ordered that extra food on purpose. I'm glad she'll have a decent meal for the next day or 2. You're welcome. He didn't know what else to say. He'd have to come up with a way to lighten Caroline's burden and make sure Katie was living on more than ramen. She was a smart girl with a bright future ahead of her. Maybe he could talk Dr. Morganton into giving her some sort of paid internship to help in the lab. It would be a much better use of her time and brains than that deli job she was chatting about excitedly over lunch. Oh, no. No, 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 no. Something was seriously wrong. He was walking up the stairs to his bedroom. Caroline had rushed up ahead of him and was standing in the middle of his mother's bedroom. The walls had a fresh coat of paint on them. It was a pretty shade of coral, maybe a bit on the bright side, but who was he to judge that kind of thing? Caroline held a paint can out to him, accusation glaring from her eyes. "That's bird of paradise," she said, her voice shaking with anger and frustration. "Not coral rock." Okay, he honestly wasn't sure what to say about that. He assumed she was referring to color names. He remembered his mother waxing on poetically about certain shades with ridiculously sounding names. Your mother specifically requested coral rock. Her feng shui advisor suggested it to promote inner peace and deeper sleep. It's the whole reason she's redoing these rooms at the last minute. And these morons used the wrong shade. She was shaking with fury. He watched her take a deep breath. The anger and frustration left her face. Her shoulders slumped and her gaze lowered, avoiding his eyes. It's my fault. I should have been here to ensure they used the right paint. I never should have let you talk me into spending the day in Charleston. Typical. Something went wrong, and he was blamed for it. He left without a word, got back in his car, and went for a drive to clear his head. Chapter 5. Caroline woke up with a pit in her stomach. When had she turned into such a jerk? She couldn't believe she'd blamed Pete for the color mix-up. She'd been angry, frustrated, and scared of losing her job over this, but that didn't excuse her behavior. It was time to pull on her big girl pants and apologize. Then she'd chat with the paint crew and figure out a way to get the room redone quickly. Thankfully, the other 2 bedrooms that the crew had started working on were painted in the correct colors. Feeling slightly better, she hopped in the shower. No fresh pastries still warm from the oven waited for her this morning. Not that she deserved any after last night's behavior. Funny how you never really appreciated the nice little gestures until they stopped. That kind of thinking wasn't helping her keep her job or fix this mess. She pulled up her hair and looked for Pete. Someone had made the coffee, so he had to be up. After a quick search of the downstairs and patio, she peeked in the garage and saw his car was there. He had to be around here somewhere. She finally found him in his mother's bedroom on a ladder painting around the trim of one of the large bay windows. "What are you doing up there?" she asked. "What does it look like?" "I'm painting," he said. "I figured I'd save the painters some time." He climbed down to read the color name off a label stuck to the lid of one of the cans that littered the floor. "Ah, coral rock. That's the color my mother wanted, right?" She was too surprised and stunned to do anything but nod. "I figured we could save some time by taking care of a bit of the prep work before the crew shows up. Grab a brush and work your way around the door," he suggested. She picked up a brush and a can of paint and got to work. She had no idea why he was helping her after the way she'd reacted last night. She expected him to be angry, not cheerful, and painting walls. That didn't diminish the gratitude she felt. "I didn't realize you could paint," she said, dipping her own brush into a fresh can of paint. "Because I'm a spoiled rich kid who's never gotten his hands dirty," he quipped back at her. Heat rose in her cheeks. She was trying to apologize to the guy, not insult him. "Good job, Caroline. Putting your foot in your mouth again. That's not what I meant. I just didn't realize you were so handy around the house." She put down her paintbrush and turned toward him. "I'm sorry about letting my frustration out on you last night. That wasn't fair. I agreed to go down to Charleston with you instead of staying here to supervise the painters. This is on me. And thank you for helping me fix it." He nodded and turned back to continue painting. "Seriously though," she said, "where did you learn to do this?" "I got involved with Habitat for Humanities in high school," he replied. "I worked with them every summer until I finished college. In the beginning, I was pretty useless with the power tools, being a rich kid and all that." He winked at her. "They trusted me with a paintbrush, so I got a lot of hands-on experience." She should stop being surprised that he didn't fit the image she painted in her head. He was a kind, considerate guy who would volunteer his time and manpower to build homes for the needy. It said a lot about a person, especially someone who could just as easily have soothed his conscience by writing a check that wouldn't even make a dent in his bank account. They shouldn't get romantically involved, but there was nothing wrong with becoming friends. Would her boss have a problem with that too? "How did you get started with Habitat for Humanity?" she asked. It didn't seem like the thing he would get involved with. "I had this friend in high school who was really into volunteering and giving back into the community. Chris dragged me to one of their local builds one summer, and we ended up helping until the project was done. It was nice to see how much of a difference it made for the family. We ended up working a couple of different builds each summer together." "That's nice. Chris must be a good guy." It sounded lame, but she wasn't sure what else to say. "Chris was a girl," he said with a grin. "Short for Christina. I don't think I would have signed up for hard labor for a guy. At the time it was the only way I could get her to spend time with me." His grin faded into a sad little smile. There was obviously more to this story. "Chris was a girl?" she asked gently. "Yeah, she passed away the year we graduated college." He kept his eyes firmly on the trim he was painting. She wasn't sure, but she thought she saw his hand shaking. "What happened?" He didn't answer for a long time. Not willing to push him for something he wasn't comfortable sharing, she kept painting around the trim of the door. She stopped and turned around when she heard him move down from the ladder. "There isn't much to say." He shrugged. "We dated for a few years. We built a few houses together. And then she died." Caroline could see the pain in his eyes. Before she could respond, he put down the paintbrush and left the room. She dipped the brush in the paint bucket and continued working around the door. By the time the painters arrived, the two of them had finished the trim work and the crew was able to finish the walls in record time. They'd averted the paint crisis. At least that was something. One less thing to worry about. Pete was another story. The raw vulnerability she'd seen in his face earlier tore at her heart. If she was brutally honest with herself, she had to admit that she was falling in love, and that was a terrible idea. She depended on this job. Her sister depended on her. They had a plan, and her getting fired over a romance with Pete wasn't part of it. She'd guard her heart and go back to the friendly banter that had worked for them in the past. Pete didn't seem ready for anything more anyway, so why was she agonizing over it? Things would work out just fine, she assured herself. She'd make it through the next few days, and after the Easter get-together, she'd return to Phoenix with Mrs. Sutton and Pete would jet off to go skydiving, or deep-sea fishing, or surfing. He never stayed more than a few weeks in one place. She knew she'd compiled his travel expenses for the family accountant last year. Yet another good reason not to get involved with Pete Sutton. It wasn't worth risking a good job for someone who would leave and forget all about her in a matter of weeks. Resolved to put Pete firmly in the friend zone, Caroline grabbed her planner and got back to work. There were a few items she could check of her to-do list before lunch. Chapter 6. Pete was thoroughly disgusted with himself. Randy was right. He'd been a coward. Instead of telling her what had happened with Christina, he'd run for the hills. He'd walked out and hidden at Randy's house for the rest of the day. Pathetic. Caroline deserved better than that. He could see that now, but yesterday all the painful memories of Chris smiling at him in school, Chris hugging the proud new homeowners after another build, and Chris pale and frail in the hospital bed, were crashing in on him. He'd panicked and walked out. Lucky for him, he had good friends like Randy to set him straight and make him come to his senses. Last night he'd realized how much he'd held on to his grief and the memories of Chris. He hadn't let another woman anywhere close to his heart until Caroline. He had no idea how she had snuck past his defenses, but she'd managed to get under his skin. Turned out that wasn't actually a bad thing. It had been 5 years since the love of his life had slipped from this world into the next while he held her. He'd never stop loving Chris. He'd always treasure the time they had together. But he was starting to wonder if there was room for someone else in his heart, Someone with silky-looking dark hair and stunning blue eyes. Someone worth risking the pain of losing down the road. It had been a long time since he let himself close to anyone. He wasn't sure he was ready. It was time to man up and find out. He waited until the paint crew had finished up and were on their way out. Caroline didn't need to know that he'd offered them a substantial tip to get the job done quickly. He was impressed when they were done well before lunchtime. He only hoped the damage he'd done by walking out yesterday wasn't irreparable. Caroline walked into the kitchen with a huge smile on her face. They got done early, she beamed, crossing an item off a list in her organizer. They did an amazing job. Everything is on track for Shelby Blake to get to work on Monday. I should text her. Her fingers were already flying, texting away. He let out the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. She was talking to him and didn't seem puzzled or upset about his vanishing act last night. That had to be a good sign. Unless she didn't feel the way he suspected he was starting to feel about her. Only one way to find out. Hey, since the painters are done, you've got some time today. Any interest in lunch? I know this little place off the beaten track that makes some amazing shrimp po' boys. He shot her his most charming grin and sent up a little prayer that she'd agree. She glanced up from her phone and raised her fingers to her slightly parted lips. He couldn't quite make out her expression. Surprise? Confusion? Whatever it was, he'd take it as long as she'd agree to spend time with him. When, she asked in a soft voice. How about right now? It's a little north of here. We'll be there just in time for a late lunch. Her eyes lit up and a smile spread across her face. That sounds like fun. I'm supposed to meet Shelby at 4 for a walkthrough of the rooms your mom wants redone. As long as we're back before then, I'm game. He grabbed her hand before she could change her mind and dragged her down to the dock. We're taking a boat, she squeaked with obvious surprise that caused a weird flutter in his stomach. We're taking my boat, he responded, unable to suppress the pride in his voice. When had he started acting like a teenager, trying to impress the girl with his boat? He shrugged it off and helped her on board. The waterway was surprisingly calm. The lack of jet skis and boat traffic made for a fun and relaxing ride. The noise of the engine made conversation a bit difficult, but it made her stay close to his side. He'd take what he could get. It surprised him how much he enjoyed watching her take in the views and soak up the sun. They were getting close to the restaurant, and he was running out of time. Slowing the boat down, so they'd have time to talk, he turned to her. I'm sorry about running out on you last night. Chris's death hit me hard, and it isn't something I've talked about much. He swallowed hard. She deserved to know what had caused him to react the way he did. More than that, if he wanted to have a shot with her, he had to open himself up and risk getting hurt again. He wasn't sure if he could do it, but he sure as heck was going to try. Chris and I were high school sweethearts. We went to different colleges, but we made it work. I was planning on proposing to her after graduation. She wasn't feeling well during the fall of our last year. At first, we thought it was the flu, but she couldn't seem to shake it. She'd feel better for a few days, and then the symptoms would come back. By the time she went to see a doctor, they diagnosed her with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. A warm hand rested on his arm in silent support. He couldn't look at her, so he kept staring out on the water, and kept talking, letting it all out. She fought it for 6 months. They tried chemo, radiation, you name it. In the end, it didn't matter. She got weaker and weaker from all the poison they kept pumping in her body to kill the cancer. It was hard to watch her suffer through it, but she stayed upbeat and hopeful until the end. It just wasn't enough. He didn't know what else to say. She must have been a very special person, and I'm sorry you lost her. He turned around to look at her, expecting to see pity in her eyes. That's why he'd never liked talking about Chris. He couldn't stand the look people gave him when they found out what happened to her. To his surprise, he saw none. Caroline accepted his grief and shared in his sadness. There was understanding in her eyes and pain. She'd lost someone too, in very similar circumstances. His heart felt a little lighter. Maybe it had been a mistake to bury his grief and his memories for all these years. He smiled at Caroline. "Thank you for listening to my sad story." She squeezed his arm, returning his smile. They rode up the waterway in companionable silence. Before long he spotted the waterfront restaurant and the dock. "Hope you're hungry." "We're here." The shrimp po' boy was just as good as he remembered. From the way Caroline was putting hers away, she either liked it as much as he did, or she was starved. The girl could eat. He liked that. Too many of the women he'd taken out over the years would barely pick at their food. Not that he'd dare bring any of them to a place like this. Sitting at an old picnic table eating sandwiches and fries served in little plastic baskets lined with wax paper wouldn't have gone over well. Caroline was different. He felt more like himself around her. Even though he and his siblings had grown up with considerably more wealth than anyone else he knew, his dad had always made sure they didn't forget their humble roots. He'd taken them fishing, camping, swimming in the ocean, and they'd always stopped at little mom and pop places like this one to eat. What was life like growing up? He asked, curious about Caroline's childhood. She cocked her head to the side, swallowing a bite of her sandwich and taking a sip of unsweetened tea before answering. "It was just Katie, Mom, and I growing up." His question must have been showing on his face. It wasn't easy, but Mom made it work. She was a nurse and spent long hours at the hospital, but somehow she always managed to be there when we needed her. Grandma would come over while she was gone, or we would stay with one of the other nurses and her kids. Looking back, I know money was always tight, but it never felt that way when we were little. Mom made sure there was always enough, no matter what we needed. "What about your dad? He didn't help out?" "No, he walked out on us right after Katie was born. I asked Mom about it much later. He packed up and left, looking for greener pastures. We never heard from him again. I don't even know if he's alive." That was harsh. He couldn't imagine walking out on a wife and 2 young daughters, leaving them to fend for themselves. No wonder Katie and her mother had changed their last name. It took effort to stop grinding his teeth. He wanted to find the guy and make him pay for abandoning his daughters. "Who did that?" "I was angry at him for a long time," she admitted. "But who knows? It may have been a blessing in disguise. It brought us closer together. We had a great childhood and we both turned out okay." She shrugged and asked if he was ready to head back in an obvious attempt to change the subject. The ride back went by in a flash. It had warmed up considerably, and he was tempted to take his shirt off. Showing off in front of Caroline had nothing to do with it. He was just getting a little too hot. Playing it safe, he decided against it. While it felt they'd gotten a lot closer, he didn't want to risk making her feel uncomfortable. They made it back just in time before the interior designer his mother had hired showed up. Shelby Blake was something else in her 4-inch heels, pencil skirt, and lacy, ruffled top. She wore about a pound of makeup and bright red lipstick that would stick to anything her lips touched. Not that he wanted to get anywhere near those lips. She was the type of high-maintenance woman he'd always avoided. He couldn't see the appeal compared to the quiet and understated beauty of Caroline. "Let me show you around," Caroline offered. He trailed behind them to his own room to change into a fresh shirt. "I'm going to need you to have these carpets shampooed, and the furniture polished over the weekend. I'm sure Mrs. Sutton's maids won't mind taking care of that." He could hear Miss Blake's shrill voice across the hall. "I'll have my team here first thing Monday morning. Could you be a dear and have coffee ready? A skinny latte with 2 shots of espresso and just a sprinkle of cinnamon, a soy macchiato, extra hot with 2 sugars, and a caramel latte, hold the whipped cream. You may want to write this down." He couldn't believe his ears. Shelby Blake was treating Caroline like her own personal assistant. The longer he listened, the worse it got. She complained about the light, the existing furniture, the fixtures, and how hard it would be for her to do anything to fix this disaster of a house. When he stepped into the hallway, he could see Caroline slumping shoulders through the open bedroom door. Her brows were knitting, and she was furiously taking notes in her organizer. If he didn't stop this, she would be up to her ears in errands all week. He'd been around women like Miss Blake long enough to know that confrontation did little good. Instead, he was going to distract her with his charms and good looks to take some pressure off Caroline and get this crazy lady out the door before she thought of anything else to add to Caroline's list. "You must be quite the designer if my mother hired you," he said, giving her his best fake smile. "I'm sure you and your team will do wonders with these rooms." He watched Miss Blake's expression change from professionally annoyed to flattered in an instant. "It's going to be a huge job, but I'm always up for a challenge," she cooed. And was that a wink? Within a flash, she moved next to him, tucking her arm into the crook of his. "Let me show you what I have planned." He sent Caroline an apologetic glance as Shelby Blake dragged him to the next room. Half an hour later, he was bored to death with all this talk of colors, textures and fabrics. It was high time to get Miss Blake out of the house. "You have quite the vision for these rooms, and I have no doubt that you and your team will turn them into reality before my mother arrives." "Of course," she replied. "I have the best team in town. You wouldn't believe the last-minute makeovers we've pulled off." "I'm glad to hear it. Surely there is no need to involve Caroline any longer. She will be very busy with other projects this week, but I would appreciate it if you could keep her updated on your progress." He steered her downstairs and out the door, grateful he wouldn't have to deal with her again until Monday. Closing the door, he turned around in time to catch the hurt look in Caroline's eyes before she walked into her room and shut the door behind herself. He heard the lock click into place. Chapter 7. Caroline locked the door behind herself, tears burning in her eyes. She'd been kidding herself about being friends with Pete. She cared a lot more about him than she'd been willing to admit to herself this morning. Watching him flirt with Miss Blake of all people had hurt. She was the kind of condescending person Caroline couldn't stand. The interior designer had tried to take advantage of her. It wasn't the first time Caroline had been in this situation. People tried to put their own work on her all the time. She would have handled it, but Pete had waltzed in there and charmed Shelby all the way out the door. Not that it mattered. She had to remind herself what was important here, and it wasn't who Pete flirted with or how she felt about him. What was important was to keep this job and keep her sister in school. A chat with Katie would help her get her head in the game and hopefully distract her from the ache in her heart. "What's wrong?" Katie answered her phone on the second ring. "Nothing. I just wanted to." "Who are you trying to kid here, sis? You were down here 2 days ago with that cutie. What did he do?" Her sister knew her too well. And if she was perfectly honest with herself, that was exactly why she'd picked up the phone. It wasn't to remind herself of the importance of a steady paycheck. It was to talk to her little sister, her best friend, and the one person she felt comfortable confiding in. "He flirted with the interior designer right in front of me," she said with a sigh. "I knew it was all too good to be true. At least, I figured out early that he's the kind of guy that is keeping an eye out for the next best thing. Besides, he'll just take off after this big family shindig anyway, and I won't see him again for months." Katie didn't seem as convinced as she was. "That wasn't the impression I was getting at all when we met for lunch. There were tons of cute girls in the restaurant and that man only had eyes for you. Are you sure this isn't all a misunderstanding? Did he say anything about leaving right after the party? Not all guys are like Dad, you know." Did she jump to conclusions? She gave her sister a play-by-play of the meeting with Shelby Blake. "Sounds to me like the chick was taking advantage of you and your good nature. You're not her PA. She should make her own appointments and run her own errands. Or hire someone to do it for her. I would have handled it. I always do." "I'm sure you would, but did he know that? Maybe he's a good guy and was just trying to get her out of your hair. Did he ask for her number? Or make plans to meet her later?" No, Caroline admitted, smoothing out the blanket on the bed she was sitting on. Give the guy the benefit of the doubt and see how things go with the two of you. Her sister's suggestion sounded a little too good to be true. Plus, it could mean setting herself up for a lot of hurt down the road. Not to mention the potential loss of her job. She wasn't about to share that particular worry with her baby sister. It would only make her feel guilty about going to school full-time. I'm not saying you should get engaged to the guy. Hang out, spend some time together, and see where it leads. If nothing else, you end up with a friend. Seems to me you could use one of those in Phoenix. Little sisters could be so annoying. But sometimes they were right. With another deep sigh, Caroline decided to guard her heart but also give Pete the benefit of the doubt. She was about to sit down to go over her schedule for the coming week when she heard the doorbell ring. She ran into Pete on her way to the front door and answered his raised eyebrows with a small smile. This wasn't the time to get into whatever was going on between them. He stepped forward and opened the door. Caroline had to stand on her tiptoes to see over Pete's wide shoulders and back. His friend from the restaurant was at the door with an arm full of stuff and a big smile on his face. Hi Randy, come on in, she said over Pete's shoulder before turning around and walking into the living area, with the two men following behind her. Since Pete was staring at Randy with a strange look in his eyes, she took over the conversation. What brings you over here? She asked, curious to find out what he was holding and what Pete's reaction was all about. He seemed very different from the Pete that had laughed with her on the boat and enjoyed the sun. That guy was easygoing and fun to be around. Yeah, what are you doing here? Pete asked, giving his friend another stare down. Randy didn't even look fazed. He plopped down on the couch and put his feet up. Just thought I'd bring you the shirt and the bib for tomorrow's race, he said. What race was he talking about? The confusion on her face must have been apparent. Looking at her and ignoring Pete completely, Randy continued. Pete runs this charity race every year to raise funds for cancer research. I'm making sure he has his t-shirt and racing number. Special treatment for the secret event organizer. He smiled and winked at her. It's tomorrow morning. Hope I'll see you there. With that he jumped up, excused himself and left, handing Pete the bundle on his way out. Closing the door, she turned around and looked at Pete. I wanted to do something to memorialize Chris and help others in her situation. The race seemed like a good idea. Randy is the one doing all the legwork, Pete said with an uncomfortable shrug. That's why you're down here early? His presence at the beach mansion when she arrived started to make a little more sense. How long have you been putting the race on? It's the first I've heard of it. It's a local thing, and no one knows I'm involved. This is the 7th year Randy and I have put it on. It's grown by leaps and bounds from that first year. She could hear the pride in his voice. This race was important to him. And it wouldn't be a bad place to watch him around a lot of other people, a lot of pretty women. Mind if I come watch you race tomorrow? She asked, watching him carefully. I'd like that. His reply seemed honest. You can ride down with me. The race starts and finishes at the old pavilion. The race was a much bigger event than she'd expected. Hundreds of runners had lined up at the start when they got there 3 hours ago. She was standing near the finish line with Randy and a few of the bigger sponsors of the race. They've gotten here early this morning, and she'd been tagging along with Randy ever since. He was busy talking to sponsors and spectators alike. It had given her plenty of time to think. She liked Pete and had gotten to know the real person behind the jet-setting Playboy facade during their time together at the Sutton Beach house. There was more to Pete than met the eye, but the man clearly had commitment issues. He'd been hurt and his default reaction when they started to get close, or when things went wrong, was to run. She understood why, but was it something she could live with? Plus, she wasn't kidding herself. A long-term relationship between a middle-class girl and a billionaire only worked out in romantic movies and fairy tales. He wasn't her knight or Prince Charming, though he had the looks for the part. He was kind and fun to hang out with. and she deserved some happiness. His mother would just have to deal with it while it lasted. She pulled her hair back and stepped up to the barricades lining the race course. Pete was running the 10K, and it shouldn't be much longer before the winner of this particular race would come into sight. Randy had told her Pete wouldn't be anywhere near the top 10 finishers. Not that he couldn't win the race outright if he wanted to, his friend had confided in her. Pete didn't want the attention that came with placing in one of the biggest charity races in the South. It's also why he was running in a baseball cap and sunglasses. There was plenty of press at the event, and he was doing everything he could to avoid being recognized. It gave her a whole new appreciation for the work he was doing with this fundraiser. He didn't do it for the publicity or recognition. He did it out of a desire to bring about change and to help researchers make progress in the treatment and prevention of cancer. He continued to astound her and defy the image of a spoiled rich kid she'd had since she started working for his mother. A mother who apparently didn't know anything about this event either, if Randy was to be believed. Here they come. Randy nudged her shoulder as the tension and excitement of the crowd became palpable. She spotted a man in a red baseball cap toward the front. Could that be Pete's hat? No way. Randy sounded as surprised as she was to see Pete pull away from the small group of runners making their way to the finish line. What is he doing? Pete was pulling further away from the pack. The spectators lining the road to the finish line started cheering louder and louder. She could feel the excitement, and it was more than a little contagious. Caroline was bouncing on her toes, hooting and hollering at the top of her lungs. Before her mind knew what was happening, she moved towards the finish line. Pete was out of breath, sweaty, and happier than she'd ever seen him. Until he caught sight of her. His face lit up as his body broke through the ribbon and he grabbed her in a big hug. When had he taken his sunglasses off? His eyes were focused on her and her alone. The butterflies in her stomach were doing somersaults. She couldn't move, she couldn't look away. All she could see was him, in front of her with his bright red baseball cap. She wanted to take that hat off and run her fingers through his hair. As he leaned in, her heart started to race. It was hard to remember to breathe. Was he going to kiss her? He held her gaze until their lips touched. His were warm and soft, and she could taste a hint of saltiness. Then all conscious thought fled, and she was wrapped up in the feeling of their lips moving together. Bright sparkles flashed all around her while he kissed her senseless. Dazed and a little out of breath, she looked up at his face when he finally let go of her. "Sorry about that, I got a little carried away there," he mumbled, not looking sorry at all. Randy cleared his throat, finally getting Pete's attention. "Dude, you just won the race. Let's get you over to the podium for the awards," he said, pulling Pete with him. "I'll be right back." Pete looked over his shoulder at her, a huge smile on his face. That's when she noticed he was no longer wearing his hat. When had that come off, she wondered, before realizing she held it in her hand. Laughter started bubbling out of her. It looked like they both had gotten a little carried away with that kiss. And she didn't mind in the least. That kiss had left no doubt he wanted her as much as she wanted him. It didn't take Pete long to get back to her. "I can't believe I won the race." He grinned. "I usually try to finish in the middle of the pack." "You were just showing off in front of your girl," Randy commented. He was walking alongside them to the parking lot. "You're not wrong about that," he replied, still grinning from ear to ear. He put his arm around Caroline and pulled her closer. "Beers and wings at Mary's tonight?" "No, can do. I'm taking my girl to Chez Paul's tonight." He looked happier than she'd seen him. She couldn't quite put her finger on what was different. He seemed more relaxed and content. She'd never been much of an athlete. Maybe it was the endorphins from the run. What she did know was that she enjoyed seeing him this way. They parted ways with Randy when they reached the car. Grabbing his keys from her bag, she got in the driver's seat. He didn't even blink, stretching out his long legs on the passenger side. "Thanks for coming out." His voice sounded thick with emotion. I don't usually have anyone cheering me on. What he didn't mention was that this was because his family knew nothing about this annual charity event he founded and had been putting on for the past 7 years. Talking to Randy at the race earlier had been eye-opening. There was a side of Pete she'd known little about, and neither did his family, apparently. My pleasure. It's a fun event for a great cause. Maybe I can run it with you next year. Of course, that would involve starting to run. She was as surprised as he looked when the words came out of her mouth. But the smile that lit up his face a second later was worth considering going for early morning runs. Chapter 8. The past 3 days had been pure bliss. Sure, he'd been barely able to move on Sunday after pulling ahead and winning the 10K. If that kiss alone hadn't been worth a few sore muscles and the inability to walk straight for a day, spending time with Caroline relaxing in the hot tub and watching movies in the living room had more than made up for the need to pop a few a leave. Monday she joined him on a short run. His girl was definitely not a runner. And yes, by now there was no doubt in his mind she was his. They'd spent every free minute together those past 3 days, swimming, biking, or hanging out on the back deck talking and getting to know each other. It would have been perfect if Miss Shelby Blake didn't spend much of the day stalking around the house barking orders. Thankfully, she had finished the job and was out of both of their lives. Last night, Caroline had winked at him and asked if he wanted to shag. 30 minutes later, they were on the dance floor taking lessons in South Carolina's state dance. The biggest surprise was that he enjoyed himself, and it wasn't just because it gave him a chance to hold her in his arms and twirl her around the dance floor. The pure joy radiating off her was infectious. He couldn't wait to do it again. The moment he walked into the kitchen, he knew something was wrong. Caroline was sitting at the kitchen table across from his mother. Her planner was open, and she was busy making notes, while Evelyn Sutton rattled off an insane amount of things she needed to get done ASAP. Good morning, son. We need to talk. That didn't sound promising. By the time he'd poured himself a cup of coffee, trying to steel himself for the unpleasant conversation he knew was coming, his mother had dismissed Caroline. She'd sent him an apologetic look and a shrug behind his mother's back before heading out the door. The message was loud and clear. She had a job to do and couldn't afford to lose it. Sit. He knew that tone. He knew that look. The last time he'd seen his mother this angry was when he'd come home in a police car after a fraternity prank gone wrong. Panic started to set in because he'd been pretty well behaved the past few years. There shouldn't be any reason for his mother to be this upset. Unless. She pulled a magazine from her purse and slid it across the large solid oak table. It looked like one of those grocery store gossip mags. Page 12. His mother's voice sounded clipped with some undertones he couldn't quite figure out. Disappointment? Regret? He flipped through the first few pages and his heart stopped when he got to page 12. Because there, right in the middle of the page, was a picture of him kissing Caroline at the finish line of Saturday's race. His hat was gone, his sunglasses were off, and his name was below the picture in big bold letters, along with a short write-up of him running and winning the 7th annual cancer charity race on Palmar Island. Thankfully, the gossip rag didn't make the connection that he was not only the biggest sponsor of the event, but also its founder. There was something to be said for small blessings. The last thing he wanted was to have his family name associated with the fundraiser that honored Chris's memory. Care to explain what you're doing kissing my personal assistant? His mother did not look happy. He wasn't sure if she was more upset about him dating someone with little social standing and few financial means, or if she didn't like the idea of someone like him dating Caroline. His mother could be surprisingly protective of the people working for her. In either case, it wouldn't be helpful to admit that he was getting serious about his relationship with the beautiful brunette. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing. I won the race, and she was happy for me. It's no big deal. He did his best to shrug it off. The look on his mother's face made him think he didn't quite succeed. At least she seemed to be willing to drop it for now. He needed to buy some time to clean this up and convince his mother that Caroline was the one. Have you talked to your brother? Brad? Just briefly. He mentioned he was down here, but busy with some project. His older brother owned a small house on the island, a few miles from the gated community the family beach mansion was in. He's avoiding my calls and emails. I think it would be a good idea for you to go check on him. He could tell from his mother's tone that this wasn't a suggestion or a simple request. It was an order, and one she expected him to follow immediately. His mother wasn't a patient person, and she had no problem getting into her children's business. He was relieved that she seemed more concerned with his brother than him. He ended up spending more time with Brad than he'd planned to. It was late afternoon by the time he made it back to the family mansion. He knew exactly why his brother was avoiding their mother, and there was no way he was letting any of that slip. He'd be avoiding their mother too if she set him up with blind dates. Thankfully, his big brother had promised to make an appearance at the party on Saturday. That should placate his mother and keep her from sticking her nose into either of their private lives. At least he hoped it would be enough. "Where is Caroline?" he asked his mother after searching the entire house for her. "Caroline is gone. I had to let her go this afternoon." His mother walked out on the back deck, a glass of wine in hand. "What do you mean you let her go? You can't just fire her. And why would you? She's done nothing but work like a madwoman since she's come down here." He knew his mother was upset, but this was taking it too far. She couldn't fire Caroline over this. Nothing? His mother gave him a look that signaled loud and clear she did not agree with his assessment of her assistant. "She kissed my son, and the picture of that kiss is blasted across every print and digital gossip rag out there. That's not the behavior I tolerate from my staff. Do you think I enjoy firing my personal assistant 3 days before a major social event? Do you have any idea what kind of bind this is putting me in? I'm answering calls from caterers, for crying out loud." Her look made it clear that she blamed him personally for this fiasco. She'd fired Caroline. He slowly started to realize what that meant, not just to him, but to her. She was without a job and without the means to support her sister. He needed to call her. He needed to check on her and make sure she was okay. At the very least, he could help her find another job and provide her with whatever she needed until she was hired. He walked back into the living room to call her. Which is when he realized that Caroline's phone had been a company phone, a phone that was now sitting on the kitchen table ringing away before going to voicemail. He couldn't call her because his mother had taken her phone back. His mother who fired her over one kiss. His mother who was the only person with access to Caroline's contact information. His mother who he knew without a shadow of a doubt wouldn't share any of that information with him. The more he thought about the situation, the angrier he got. He couldn't stay in this house. He couldn't stand to look at his mother. Grabbing his car keys, he sped out of the door. Pete didn't return to the family mansion until Saturday. Not that he wanted to be here, but his mother hadn't given him a choice in the matter. After his exit on Wednesday afternoon, she'd called him and made it clear in no uncertain terms that his trust fund and allowance and his position in the family company would be gone if he missed the annual Easter gathering. If he'd been under any illusions that his mother wasn't still upset about the kiss and his involvement with Caroline, her actions made it crystal clear. She expected him to get in line and get involved with someone that met her approval. He planned to make a brief appearance and then fly off to Hawaii, the Alps, or anywhere else that didn't remind him of Caroline. What he didn't realize was that his mother had seen it fit to provide him with an appropriate date. Madison was a gorgeous blonde with a trust fund he was sure matched his own. She was cultured, smart, and moved in the same circles as he and his family did. In short, she was everything his mother wanted in a date for him. And he was bored out of his mind. He'd walked out to the large deck overlooking the ocean to get some air. He needed a break from small talk and from Madison's advances. She'd made it more than obvious that she wouldn't mind spending time together and see if this instant attraction could lead to something more. "You look miserable." His brother stepped up beside him and handed him a beer. He wasn't surprised by the observation. He'd stopped hiding how much he didn't want to be here a couple of hours ago. He was miserable and he missed Caroline. He wanted to be here with her, talk to her, dance with her, and introduce her to family friends. He wished his mother could have accepted Caroline and embraced her as warmly as she had Madison. Sadly, that ship had sailed. Heck, he didn't even know how to track her down. Heard about you and Caroline. Saw the picture too. He shouldn't be surprised. His mother would have made sure everyone in the family was aware of his misstep. Do you like her? His brother was a man of few words. It was one of the things he liked best about Brad. I do. More than I realized. What are you doing here then? Go after the girl. It sounded so simple. If only that was an option. I don't know how to get a hold of her. The admission hurt. Mommy dearest took her phone, he barked out. And there's no way she'll give me any contact info. I don't even know where she lives when she's not staying at one of the family properties. He hated how defeated his voice sounded. He'd run through all the options in his head. He'd even called Sutton Corporation headquarters, but the head of HR was as tight-lipped as his mother. He'd searched every single social media platform he could think of without success. Unlike almost everyone else he knew, Caroline didn't seem to have an online life, at least not under her real name. What about her sister? Isn't she going to school in Charleston? Couldn't you get her contact info through the admissions office? His brother asked. All I have is her first name, and that might be a nickname. She changed her last name to the mother's maiden name as a teenager. They aren't very helpful when you're looking for a Katie who's pre-med. If all else fails, you could hang out on campus until you run into her, his brother shrugged, looking as helpless as Pete felt. Don't think that hasn't crossed my mind. Problem is there are buildings all over town and I have no clue what classes she's taking. He really should have paid more attention when they had lunch at Old Henry's. Didn't you get her sister a job at the lab in Charleston? Shouldn't be hard to track her down through the guy that runs it. At the very least, you could get a message to Caroline through her sister. His brother was brilliant. Pete hugged him and dug in his pocket for his keys. Brad snatched the keys from his hand. You've had a few too many to drive to Charleston. Plus, if you leave, Mother will know something is up. Play it cool until Monday morning. You won't be able to get a hold of anybody at the college until then, anyway. Pete hated it when his brother was right. He had to lie low until Monday. He could wait a couple of days to find Caroline. He would spend the time thinking of every single convincing argument about why she belonged with him. He hoped it would be enough. Chapter 9. Caroline was shoving the pillow and blanket she'd been using in her sister's closet when she heard a knock on the door. Her sister had already left for her job at the lab, picking up a few extra hours before class this morning. Lucy, her sister's roommate, had walked out to grab breakfast with friends a few minutes ago. She'd invited Caroline to come along. The offer had been tempting, but it was time to get serious and find a job. She'd wallowed in self-pity long enough. She would deal with whoever was at the door and then spend the morning updating her resume and getting feelers out for a new executive or personal assistant position. She opened the door and the last person she'd expected to see again was standing in front of her, holding a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite. What are you doing here, Pete? She asked, trying hard to get her bearings. Her hands were sweaty and her stomach in turmoil. She could feel how fast her heart was beating in her chest and it was making her dizzy. I had to see you. I missed you. May I come in? Pete had been kind and polite during their time together before, but this felt different. His smile had a serious undertone that was new. She stepped away from the door, motioning for him to enter the small two-bedroom condo her sister shared with fellow pre-med student Lucy Walker. She didn't know what he would think of the living room and kitchenette furnished with thrift store finds. Thankfully, she'd spent a few minutes this morning cleaning up behind the two busy college students. The dishes were done, no dirty laundry was strewn across the place, and it was fairly clean. Still, there was a world of difference between an off-campus rental and the mansions his family owned or the high-end hotels they stayed at during their travels. These are for you. Pete handed her the flowers before walking around the small condo. "This is nice. So much better than my room at Stanford. It was such a dump and my roommates didn't help. I guess that's what you get when you share a rundown 3-bedroom house with 2 other guys." His reaction surprised her and she wasn't sure how to respond. He wasn't acting like the spoiled son of the billionaire boss who'd fired her. Walking into the kitchen, she looked for something to use as a vase. "Can we talk?" he asked with a vulnerable look in his eyes that tugged at her heartstrings. Caroline put the flowers into a margarita pitcher and set it on the small kitchen table. She gestured for him to take a seat. "Coffee? Later. There are some things I need to get off my chest if you don't mind." The vulnerability in his eyes was killing her. All she could do was nod. "I want to apologize for my mother. I had no idea when I left on Wednesday that she would fire you. I knew she wasn't happy about that kiss and that it made it into the papers. I never would have left to go check on my brother if I'd known." "Thank you." It had been one of the most uncomfortable moments of her life to have Evelyn Sutton lecture her about how utterly inappropriate her behavior had been. It was followed by an immediate dismissal and the promise of a good reference if she left quietly right away. Mrs. Sutton had made it clear that her son had no interest in a relationship with her. According to his mother, he'd had these little dalliances for years. He needed a girlfriend that could move in their social circles and become a true partner in their relationship. And if her former boss was to be believed, that wasn't going to be someone like Caroline who had to work for a living and support her sister. The argument had been convincing, and really, what choice did she have? If she crossed someone as powerful as Evelyn Sutton, it would become next to impossible to find another well-paying job in her field. Sad as it was to admit, that was all she had going for herself right now. So she'd left and driven down to Charleston to stay with her sister. "I'm sorry it's taken me so long to track you down. I wasn't sure how to reach you. If it wasn't for my brother Brad talking some sense into me and reminding me about your sister's job at the lab, I'd still be off sulking about what my mother did to us." She had wondered how he had found her. Without a phone or permanent address, she wasn't easy to track down. "How did you find out about this place?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her. "I called the lab this morning. Dr. Morganton was more than happy to share your sister's address after the donation he received from the race. At least he had the decency to look embarrassed about violating several privacy laws. If she was perfectly honest with herself, she didn't mind. She was glad he was here and it didn't matter how he'd tracked her down. I missed you." Raw emotion was shining in his eyes as he reached across the table to take her hand. "I want to make up for the way my mother treated you." He slid a piece of paper across the table to her. "What is this?" she asked, glancing at the document. It looked like a financial statement with the college's letterhead. "It's your sister's tuition. I didn't want her to drop out because you lost your job. The next 2 semesters are paid in full. I'll have my lawyers set up a trust next week to cover grad school. I don't care what it takes. I will make sure she gets to finish med school." Caroline's head was spinning. He was setting up a trust and spending his money to help her little sister. It didn't make sense. "Why?" "Because I love you, and you deserve to be happy." His hand covered hers. He stroked the side of her hand with his thumb, sending sparks up her arm. "I don't want you to worry about paying for school for Katie." There was a question in his eyes when she looked up at his. "You don't have to do that. Katie and I will be fine. I'm sure I can find another job." "I know you can, but I hope you'll consider staying with me instead." He swallowed hard. "Unless you don't feel the same about me." He'd told her he loved her, and unless she'd lost her ability to judge people, he meant every word of what he'd said. "I love you too." The reply came out without a conscious thought on her part. He pulled her up and into his lap. "Good." It was all he said before brushing his lips across hers. Pete kissed her gently. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed herself closer as he deepened the kiss. She'd been miserable the last few days. He had occupied her thoughts every waking moment. And that was the last coherent thought she had for a while. "How are we going to make this work?" she asked when they finally broke their kiss long enough to catch a breath. She loved him and had been in love with him far longer than she realized. "Your mother won't be any happier about this now than she was last week." And she didn't want to be the one to cause a rift between him and his family. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Caroline," he replied earnestly. "My mother will have to get used to the idea. If she doesn't, it's her loss." If only things were that simple. He lifted her off his lap and sat back down in the chair before getting down on one knee in front of her. Her breath caught in the back of her throat. This wasn't happening, he couldn't be. "Caroline Davis, you are the most important person in my life. You make me want to be a better person, and I can't imagine spending another day without you. I know this is asking a lot, but would you consider becoming my wife?" He took hold of her hand and looked at her with naked longing in his eyes. Tears sprang up in her eyes. This was too good to be true. It was something out of a fairy tale, with her own Prince Charming kneeling down in front of her. He was the man she wanted to build a life with, start a family with, grow old with. It didn't matter that his mother didn't approve of her. It didn't matter that they came from two different worlds. He wanted to be with her, and she wanted to be with him. At the end of the day, this was the only thing that mattered. They would figure out the rest. "Yes," she breathed, barely audibly. "I'll marry you, Pete Sutton." "I don't have a ring for you," he admitted, looking cute with that embarrassed look in his eye. "I surprised myself. It didn't occur to me until I was driving down here. I had to see you and didn't want to stop to shop for a ring." His look was begging her forgiveness. "I don't want you to think I'm not serious. The decision may have been spontaneous, but when you know it's right, it's right." She couldn't agree more. "I don't care about a ring. I care about being with you. You never cease to amaze me," he told her. "Most of the women I know would have been upset at a proposal that didn't involve a big event and a huge rock." She didn't doubt it. She'd met quite a few of the spoiled rich young women at the parties and events she'd arranged for the Sutton family. "That's why you love me and not one of those other women," she said simply, and knew deep down in her heart it was the truth. "I would like to take you back home as my fiancé and work all this out with my family if we can," he admitted a short while later. "This isn't about ticking off my mother, though if I'm perfectly honest, that will be fun after everything she put you through. I want you to be part of my life and my family. I want to share everything I have with you by my side." She couldn't even imagine how that was going to work. She liked his family, but had always been on the outside. She was part of the help that kept things running smoothly for the Sutton family. Her doubts must have been showing on her face. "We don't have to go back up to Palmar Island or Phoenix, for that matter," Pete reassured her. "If you don't want to deal with my family, I totally get it. We can fly out to Tahiti today if you'd like and let the dust settle. I really don't know how my mother will react to all this. Frankly, while I would like to work things out, I don't care what she does or threatens to do." He stood up and started pacing around the room. "Maybe we should fly out and spend a few weeks on the island. Don't get used to it though. There's a chance she'll cut us off from the family fortune." She couldn't imagine what it would mean for him to have to make it on his own. She watched him square his shoulders, making a decision. A smile played across his face when he continued. "I can always start up a painting business. I'm pretty handy with a roller. You can run the office." She couldn't help but return the smile. Picturing him splattered in paint and dead tired after a long day spent painting other people's homes was surprisingly easy. He was the kind of man who would do whatever it took to take care of those he loved. He'd grown up with more money than he knew what to do with, but somehow he had stayed grounded. He built houses for those in need and had put his own financial resources and his influence to good use. She had no doubt that they would find their way, no matter what his mother decided to do. "Let's go see your mother," she told him. I love you with or without your fortune, but family is important. Let's do what we can to convince her that we belong together. I don't deserve you, he told her while helping her into her jacket. But I will do everything I can to keep you by my side. She laughed and shook her head at him. I think I'm getting the better end of the bargain here. She couldn't wait to get the meeting with his mother over with so they could focus on building their future together. No matter what that future would look like. She loved this man with or without his trust fund and family fortune. Epilogue. Tahiti, 6 weeks later. She couldn't believe she was here. The past few weeks had gone by in a whirlwind of activity and wedding planning. Neither of them had wanted a long engagement. The meeting with his family had gone better than she'd hoped. It had taken a bit of convincing and the help of his brother, but Evelyn Sutton had come around. The fact that Caroline had happily signed a 50-page prenup agreement that would leave her with next to nothing if things didn't work out with Pete had gone a long way to convince his mother she wasn't after his money or the family fortune. The day before the wedding, Evelyn had taken her out to lunch and they'd talked. It wasn't quite a conversation of equals, but it had been close. Evelyn's mother had shared that she liked the changes she'd seen in her son. He seemed more serious, more driven, more interested in the family business. The older woman had confessed he seemed happier than she'd seen him in a long time. Caroline was surprised to see this side of the woman who was soon her mother-in-law. She hoped their relationship would continue to grow and evolve. The wedding had been a relatively small and private affair, much to Evelyn Sutton's dismay. Pete had rented Magnolia House, an old plantation surrounded by sprawling gardens. It was a stunning backdrop for a wedding. Her sister had been the maid of honor, Pete's brother Brad the best man. While it was small and low-key by Billionaire standards, it ended up much more luxurious than she'd ever dreamed it would be. Her dress was a custom-tailored designer gown, and she was sure it had cost a fortune. Thanks to her mother-in-law, she'd never seen even a hint of a price tag. The house had drowned in flowers, most of them white lilies. Caroline had arranged for most of them to be delivered to the local hospital and a few senior care facilities after the wedding. Evelyn had made most of the arrangements with the help of Caroline's replacement. She liked Timothy. He had great taste, superb organizational skills, and the right attitude to handle his boss when she got into one of her moods. In the long run, he'd make an even better personal assistant than Caroline had been, especially with her help. They'd worked closely together on the wedding and she looked forward to tapping into his skills and contacts for future events. All in all, the transition into the Sutton clan had gone smoother than she'd expected. The vast family fortune still didn't impress her, but she had to admit that perks like flying in a private plane to a tropical island had their appeal. Pete hadn't been joking when he'd offered her a trip to Tahiti. Their private cabin, hidden away behind lush tropical vegetation, had its own private beach. The kitchen was fully stocked and dinner was served each night courtesy of one of the top chefs of a nearby resort. It was pure bliss. Her ring sparkled in the sunshine, competing with the reflection of the sun in the deep blue water in front of her. The ring was a family heirloom. It had originally belonged to Pete's grandmother. She was honored to wear it and hoped it was a sign that their relationship would be just as long and loving as that of his grandparents. Pete strolled out to the beach to join her on the large towel she'd spread out to soak in the sun and the view. "Happy?" he asked, handing her a mango and papaya smoothie. "Very. I could get used to this." She smiled at him. There'd been more joy and laughter these past few weeks than she could remember. "It didn't take you long to embrace the lifestyle of the rich and famous," he teased. She laughed with him. It was true. She enjoyed the perks of being married to a billionaire, but there was so much more to him than what meets the eye. By the way, the event manager at the Royal Palms got back to me and confirmed the dates. The gala in October is a go. They'd been planning a new fundraiser for cancer research for the past week. Just because they were on their honeymoon didn't mean they couldn't do some good. Besides, organizing a black tie event was her idea of fun. She couldn't wait to see how much good the funds they were about to raise would do in cancer research. "Evelyn called me this morning," she told her new husband. Sutton and Sutton Corporation will match the donations for the gala and she'll foot the bill for the venue. You have her wrapped around your little finger, don't you? He teased. It's like you don't even know her, she fired back. All joking aside, it's nice that your mother is taking an interest. Having the full force of the company behind Sutton charitable outreach will make a huge difference in what we can do not just for cancer research, but scholarship funds for underprivileged students and no-kill shelters. I've been thinking we should look into how we can help keep the arts in schools. Oh, and Randy called me about a new program to help young mothers without a support system. There's so much good we can do, she trailed off when she noticed the huge grin on his face. I love how passionate you are about the charity work. I agree. There's so much more good we can do. That's why I've submitted my resignation from the Sutton and Sutton Corporation Board of Directors and my position as VP of Advertising effective immediately. As soon as we get back, we will step into our new role as co-presidents of Sutton Charitable Outreach. That's why she loved this man. His heart was as big as his trust fund, and together they would be able to do amazing things to raise funds for charity. She dug her organizer out of the beach bag sitting behind her. It was time to get to work and see how much good they could do with the influence and fortune of the Sutton family behind them. The end. This has been Stranded Poolside with the Billionaire's Son. Written by Susanne Ash. Copyright 2019 by Susanne Ash. Production copyright 2022 by Susanne Ash. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe if you want me to put more of my books on YouTube. Visit my website at www.susanneash.com for more of my books or find me on Amazon.